Welcome back to 15 with Fosca, the podcast. My guest today is Gina Mazza, author, writer, editor, publishing consultant, content creator, citizen journalist, word provocateur, and creative alchemist. Gina is joining us today from Nashville, Tennessee. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you for accepting my invitation, Gina. Welcome.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm so thrilled to be here, and I love your podcast.
And I love when people say that because sometimes, you record, I record the podcast and I'm like, okay, there it goes out into the world. And it just gives me so much joy that people are finding value in it. And I'm just happy that you're here today. We met through, well, we have not yet met in person, but we will at some point because Nashville, I don't know if I told you this, it's very much on my wish list and has been for a long time. So one day I will just show up on your doorstep. But we met through our mutual friend, Joe Weston, who we were just talking about a few minutes ago. And when I told him I had just written my first novel, he said, "Oh, you should speak to my friend Gina." And I really appreciate you. I appreciate a lot about you, and I want to share what you do with my listeners because I think they'll see a lot of value in how you help fellow writers, because you are an accomplished writer yourself, but a lot of the work you do is helping other writers. So I think that just leads perfectly into my first question, which is, for those listeners who might not know you yet, can you talk a little more about what you do and who you are?
Yeah, well, I think you kind of summed it up there, and I'll reiterate what you said. Being a word provocateur is my tagline because I feel like that summarizes how I feel about language, and I do everything word related. So writer, editor, journalist, poet, content creator, brand identity, taglines, keynotes, TED Talks, pitch decks. I mean, everything that you can imagine that is word related, but mostly book writing and publishing and co-writing with others, co-authoring with others, and also editing and helping them publish in whatever form, whether it's traditional publishing through a publishing contract or self-publishing or hybrid, which is that big gray area in between. So who I am, I guess I would say that I have always been enamored with language my entire life. I mean, I used to read the dictionary for fun as a kid. My face was always in a book. Of course, I was in the spelling bee in 7th and 8th grade. And I've always been attracted to the sound and the lyricism of words and language. And for me, it became in my early years, teen years, I would say, what I always refer to as rule line psychoanalysis, which is I would write in a journal, and it was a repository for all of the emotions that I was feeling, like many people do, right? But I think maybe more than the average person, I am very inquisitive and introspective, and I needed some place to emote. And
Yeah.
so the journal was where I did that. And it also was my doorway into my own inner realms, because at the same time I was going to a Catholic grade school, and I was having a lot of big questions in my young mind about the nature of reality and the meaning of life and the meaning of death. And those answers, I didn't get answers to those questions necessarily in Catholic grade school. And in some cases, I was accused of being out of line or even blasphemous if I was to ask or question the nuns. So I took all of that to the page. And it actually, looking back now, it was the start of my ability to do what I would call is, intuitive writing, which is grasping and pulling down information from a source other than myself. And I do that to this day. And that's a big part of my work process as well, because when I work with author clients, it's almost like I can help them understand that higher vision of what their book is. Even if they can't articulate it, I can tap into it and help them refine the essence of it. So
That's a beautiful description of who you are and what you do. And I just want to say that you and I did have a conversation where I saw that happen in real time. And
ah
I we were speaking about my novel, which is, fiction, but we had a conversation and you were like, well, have you thought about maybe, this or that? And so you really got me thinking, and I don't think I have forgotten, because I have not. Because I believe you're right. I believe your intuition is correct. It's just a question of my being able to actually sit down and write it. So I have seen firsthand how keen that's you really have a gift with really getting where people are supposed to be. And so I love that about you. And it's something that not everybody has by any means, not writers, not, the average person, for sure. So I love what you just described. And you often describe writing as a sacred act. What does that mean to you in like an everyday sense?
Yes, for sure. Well, first, let me say that for me, at the core, writing is, it comes down to the power of story. And that's what I say right on my homepage on my website, because I do believe that the storytellers are the most powerful people on earth. And the reason that I feel that and sort of know that is because we live in a story shaped world. I mean, every aspect, if you sit back and really, dig deep with it, every aspect of our lives, our mental and emotional lives, our social lives, our dreams, how we worship, our faith based beliefs, our families, our laws, our ethics, everything is a story.
Yeah.
And it's a story that enough of us believe in mutually that we hold it dear. And that's why um, these, what I call fictive realities, like money to me is a fictive reality. If everybody stopped believing in the power of money, it wouldn't have the power that it has. It's because we do believe in the power of money that it is so powerful. Um, but that's really essential to know, because I don't think we would even survive without our stories. We would not even be able to survive. We wouldn't be able to make sense of the world, and of life. And anyone who doubts the power of stories and the power of words, I would say look at the power that they have right now over who's trying to control them, right? Like, who is trying to control the narrative right now? And so, yeah, so I feel like, the truth in the form of story, it becomes something that we've invented so that we can live, so that we can actually live and thrive. I mean, I feel like it's that foundational,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
A
Um,
100%. 100%. And I
yeah.
couldn't agree more. And I think, especially right now, we need stories
Mhm.
more than ever. I mean,
Right.
we need it's escape, it's survival, it's understanding, it's all these different things. And I mean, even if you just look at the power of podcasting right now, like how popular podcasting is, we can be a little meta about this, but you know, people love stories. They love hearing voices,
Yeah.
and that's something that is so incredible to me as somebody who, a lot of what you were saying about when you were a child is very relatable to me. I would love getting lost in books and getting lost in my writing. And, it just, there was safety there and
Yeah.
solace and, but also this deeper understanding of the world and of ourselves. And so that just resonates so much with me. And it kind of leads me to my next question. You know, I think today publishing is such a it's such a jungle, it's so hard. And I think a lot of times, you know, us writers, we know that we have something to say, or we're on the cusp of something, but we're not really trusting ourselves yet. We're not really quite there. How do you help writers um, take that leap?
Yeah, I think it begins with your why. Why are you writing and what are you writing? Because there's so many different variations that can take in this day and age. And it should come from a deeper place and not some outward projection of, oh, I have to have, I have to give a speech here, or I need to have a podcast there, or I need to have a Substack, or I need to even, a lot of people say to me, I need to publish a book. And when I ask them why, they don't have an answer. It's because someone's told them that they should do it. So I think it needs to come from a deeper place of understanding why you even want to write and publish. And then from there, I mean, that's when we get into the psychology of writing, because once I start digging into the emotional aspects of what the person may be feeling, there's always, I would say 99% of the time, there's fear behind it. So fear of failure, fear of not being good enough, fear of being judged. What will people think of me? Some sort of recrimination that they might, hypothetically experience in the future. Hasn't happened, but they're imagining that it's going to happen. So it's all those lower human emotions of like guilt and shame and what happens if you're exposed, right? Because I work with mostly people who are telling stories of their life or stories of their overcoming, or it's more not memoirish necessarily, but definitely nonfiction and more based on their own experiences. And so that brings up that preciousness even more in the person, because they feel like they're not just writing a book, but they literally are exposing themselves to the world. And it can be really, really scary. So that's part of what I help writers do. And I'm not a psychotherapist, although I've been told by many people that
a little.
and I'm not per se a spiritual counselor or anything like that, but I feel like part of that is in my essence, and I call on it when I'm talking with someone who needs to be carried through the process of understanding what it is they're writing, why they're writing it, how to write it, and then how to share it, how it gets published. So, that requires also knowing yourself on a deeper level. Like I really don't have an interest in working with people who just kind of like skate through life. They just stay on the surface. I really love to work with people who are again, like I was, asking big questions and wanting to solve big problems, which we certainly have in the world right now.
We sure do. We sure do.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk. I love the fact that you're a poet. I love poetry. Once upon a time, I dabbled a little and I tried, but it's not my jam, if you will. But I want to talk a second about your award-winning book, Essential Astonishments, which brought together poetry and spiritual inquiry. And I'd love to know how the book was born.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. And every book, the way it's formed, has its own story, and it's never the same. I don't think that there's any cookie cutter experience for people who write books. Every book has its own journey. And this one certainly did. And I would say that it took a departure from even my own writing, because I was writing mostly narrative nonfiction, journalism, real life type stuff. And I did realize at some point that over the course of my life, I have spontaneously written poems about certain things just when I'm inspired. But I never thought of myself as a poet until 2019. It was May of 2019 when I started to have this extemporaneous experience of waking up at 3 a.m. and I would hear or see words, phrases, sentences in my inner vision. And that kind of thing is not necessarily new to me, because I do that sort of process. But this was distinctly different in the sense that I felt like I was to just record, just take dictation. And so I literally just grabbed my iPhone and used voice memo and just started saying what I was seeing or hearing. And it really was interesting to me at some point, because I was writing about things that in retrospect hadn't happened yet. For example, I was writing about a pandemic. And I hadn't even like thought of the word pandemic. I hadn't like,
Who had, Gina? Who had? I mean,
right, maybe epidemic, but
really,
not pandemic. Yeah. And so
that's, that's
I
crazy
realized
part.
that
Like,
I realized at some point that this information was not for me, it was for others. And again, I was not cautioned, but encouraged to just write it straight. Don't edit, which is hard for me to not get in there and fuss with the words, but just write it straight. And so I did. And this went on every night at 3 o'clock for months. And I ended up with, I don't know, 50, 60 pages of content. And it was just all in one long strand. And so what I did was I sent it to a client of mine at the time. She's now deceased. I actually dedicate the book to her. But she was a poet laureate herself. And so I sent her the information and I said, just tell me what I have. I don't really know. And she read it and she said it was Rumi-esque, which really humbled me greatly. And then she said, I think this is a book of poetry, which Fosca, I have never considered writing a book of poetry. It's not on my wish list, right?
right.
So I said to her name is Frances, I said, but Frances, I'm not a poet. And she said, honey, you are now.
I love it.
And so she encouraged me to put it together. And it took me a while to do that because I was working on many other projects. And then 2020 happened, COVID happened, and the world shifted. And I realized, yeah, that this information is necessary for people to hear. And so I ended up gathering a few other poets because, again, it kind of feeds my desire to help others with their writing. So, and that's a whole other story that for another time. But I ended up with 5 other poets who were also writing with what I call the holy pen. Like they also had a similar vibe in terms of what they were writing about. Is very prescient and very relevant to what's happening right now. And so I invited them into the project and they all said yes. And so we published the book together and voila, there it is.
You've just blown my mind. I mean, I had no idea that that's how this book was born, and it's a beautiful, beautiful story. And I don't know what it is about 3 a.m., but when I was writing my novel, I don't know if I told you this, but I would wake every morning at 3 a.m. like clockwork, and I just had to write. And the
Yeah.
words just came out of nowhere. And I do describe it as this like very sort of I mean, I've been trying to write a book my whole life, Gina, and all of a sudden, the words were just coming to me in the sense that I'd be walking down the street and I'd have to stop and, jot things down on my phone. I would dictate things. It was much more than it wasn't struggle. It was just coming to me out of nowhere. And it was always at 3 a.m., which must be like the witching hour or something. I don't know. There must be some symbolism in it. But I love that story. It's also, I think it's also about like, you said like I never thought of myself as a poet, and it took that external person to say to you, well, honey, now you are, which is really what you do with other people. That's what you do to writers. You help them understand that they have something to say.
Yeah, and I always give them the benefit of the doubt because I can see their potential and they might not be there yet.
Yeah.
And it's my job, so to speak, my job, to help them maximize their highest potential. I think when it comes to myself, I have probably 2 exceedingly high standards because my vision of poetry was reading, my favorites are the ecstatic poets like, Mirabai and Rilke and Rumi and also modern day poets like David White and John O'Donohue and also very classic writers, D.H. Lawrence, uh, writers who just have, they're at the epitome of their craft.
Yeah.
And so whenever I'm sitting down to write something, I feel like, yeah, I have to match that. I have to at least do something that has that same frequency
Mhm.
in the writing. And so I can be hard on myself. But again, this project was distinctly different in the sense that I was told, my higher guidance
Yeah,
told me, don't
absolutely.
fuss with it, just put it out there. And
Do it. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we're so glad that you did. Um, kind of a related question. You know, a lot of people want to write a book. They're like, I want to write a book, but they don't know that they don't really know where to start. What kind of advice would you give somebody who like kind of knows that they have it in them, but they again, getting back to that, we are really our own worst enemies because we often are the ones who block ourselves from doing things. And so, what kind of advice do you give people who have that book in them, but they don't know, like they don't have maybe the confidence to just, sit down and churn it out?
Well, if they don't know yet what they're wanting to write about, that's where I would start
Yeah.
is what is it that you have to say? Or as I like to phrase it, what must I say before I die? So if you had to really narrow it down, like if you had 1 year to live and you wanted to say something as part of your legacy or for posterity, what would it be? And other questions that you can sort of circle around to answer that is, for example, what breaks your heart? Like, what is it that moves you emotionally? What are the things that you can't ignore or that keep coming back around in your consciousness that you can't keep at bay? And, what do you care about? So that's, your heart has to be in the process because, again, that emotion gets translated into the words and onto the page. If you're, wanting to just write something and, use AI to create it, it's not going to have that same frequency. So, so it's really understanding what it is that moves you. It's also, looking practically speaking at your gifts. Like, what is it that what are your skills? What is your skill level? What is your voice, your writing voice? Some might be comedic, some might be sardonic, some might be, more highbrow. You have to know your voice. Um, and the third thing would be, where do you see a real need? And this is where my marketing brain comes in because my background is in corporate PR and marketing and media relations and so forth. So, which is great because books are products and you need to, as an author, need to know
Absolutely.
how to sell them.
Absolutely.
Um, so looking at what is the world's need right now and how can you fulfill that and not to get too grandiose about it where you have to do something that is completely unique and has never been done before because there's really nothing new under the sun. It's the execution of it. It's how you pull it together. Um, and it's like the clay that you mold. It's how you mold it. It's not the clay. It's how you mold it. So it's looking at things like, where is there, light or darkness present? Where is there truth missing? Where are people hurting? I feel like right now people are really starving for truth. They're starving for clarity and courage
Yeah.
and having abiding faith. And so those are the topics that I encourage people to write about because I feel like it does match the world's need right now. And that doesn't mean, again, that you have to do something really epic. It can be your own personal life story molded into higher themes that are more universal that help people understand um, again this aspect of what I call it overcoming, but it's in my own memoir I say it's not about what happens to us, it's about who we are going through it and what we become as a result of it. So that's the story. The
Yeah.
story is not so much what happened to me, it's how I moved through it and transformed it. And that's the inspiring part. And that's what people like to read.
Absolutely. And are there, I mean, you phrased it so perfectly, like, well, what would you want to say? Like, what do you want to leave, before you leave this earth? But do you find yourself returning to certain themes often in your personal writing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it goes back to, again, journaling as a kid, because my two worlds did converge in the sense that I was asking questions of, I guess you could call them questions of faith. One of my earliest questions that I journaled about was, who is God? What is God? I
Yeah.
want to know God. I want to know what God's thinking. I don't really care what I'm thinking. I want to figure out what He has to say, or the Creator has to say, and be a vessel for that, if possible, for
Yeah.
that wisdom. And so that set me on a course of really being introspective around spirituality and consciousness. And then, of course, the New Age came along, and I was breaking out from my corporate career. I also am an entrepreneur. So I had founded a company, a CPA marketing consulting firm, and I was rotating off of that. We sold the company, and I was becoming a full time writer. And that was right when the new age was in its prime, right? So I was out there interviewing Deepak Chopra and Eckhart Tolle, and all the people that were writing books
Yeah.
about mindfulness and mind, body, spirit. And as I was doing that, I was having my own spiritual awakening. As I was experimenting and learning and writing and exploring these topics. So, and that's a never-ending journey that you never know it all. As a matter of fact, the more the more you know that you don't know. Seriously,
Yeah.
like that's the spiritual journey right there. So, and we're always evolving as humans. So we're not in the same place. Obviously, we're not in the same place that we were even 5 years ago in terms of our own evolution, our own level of consciousness. I actually think this is a really potent time right now for a leap in consciousness
Mhm.
for us to have. And so again, I was sort of writing about the shift that we're in right now back in the 90s. And it's really interesting to see it come to fruition. It's not always comfortable, right? Because we're at a time of great chaos and deconstruction. But if you can continue to, again, I always turn to writing. If you can continue to write about it, meditate about it, and get those higher answers to what's happening, and not get caught up in the day-to-day minutia of who said what, and all of the things that aren't going to matter, or that we're not going to remember in 5 years. If you can hover above that and really see the patterns that are happening, um, and the reason for them, then it's not so disconcerting.
I love that as an answer. I love that vision. I think it's helpful also because it does feel so unsettling right now. And I think that kind of distance that can be created, or, for me, the kind of the, not only just the discipline of writing, but the calm that it brings, and, that ability to then work through things is fundamental. And I mean, it takes various forms for different people, but, for us, it takes the form of, writing as a way to work through all these things. What are you working on now?
Yeah. So again, I always go to the creator, capital C, for what I'm supposed to be working on next in terms of my own writing iterations. Of course, I'm always at all times working on about a dozen book projects with
Right.
clients. So, and that's so much fun. And I get so much enjoyment and learn so much, from
Mhm.
that process. But as they say, the writer has to tend their own fire. So where's my creative spark? What am I jazzed about? And so I always put that in terms of, when I'm in my prayer or meditation practice, I'm sort of lightly asking, okay, what's next for me? You tell me. I like to say God is my timesheet, because I wait to hear the answer and or see what happens. So, long story made bearable, what happened this past 6 months or so is um, the opportunity to work on the film adaptation for a book that again has the potential to be a feature film. And I can't really say too much about it because it's
Okay.
all being papered right now by the attorneys. There's all these different contracts involved, but um, it definitely was an answer to the prayer that I had, 3 to 6 months ago, because I've worked on portions of screenplays, but I've never written an entire script myself. And the way this came to me was very synchronistic and almost magical because I wasn't obviously looking to do that, but it happened when I read some material. And again, I just sort of saw the movie playing in my inner vision. I saw the opening scene and saw the four parallel storylines. And it's a fascinating story based on real life events that happened at the turn of the 20th century.
Mm.
Uh, but it's also relevant to what's happening today with one of the biggest topics that's being talked about, and that I feel is being uncovered. So it's really cool. Creativity is fascinating to me because there's no end to it. It's boundless. And I think if we ask for the experience of how to express ourselves creatively, I feel like it does come along. Like you said, it's not when you're sitting down writing, trying to, make the words happen, but when you're out on a hike somewhere, or you're in the grocery store looking at the bananas, or you're talking with your grandchild. I mean, that's when the spark really happens. And like you said earlier, you take time to follow that. You write it down. You jot a note to yourself, or you capture the thought, because those are the kernels of inspiration that are appropriate to follow when they come as a poof, like a spark.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I, I, I really, I'm so thankful that you said that because I get all these things all the time, right? And I'm like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen with it, but I need to write it down now. And then I'll be like, oh, okay. Now I know where and with my book, it was very insistent. And now it's a little, now that I'm kind of like, what's my next project? I don't really know. Um, I'm getting all these things and I'm like, which direction am I going to go in now? And so I love the story you told, and I'm very curious. I'm curious by nature. And so now you've got me extremely curious. So you're going to have to let me know how things pan out. But writing for cinema is one of my biggest dreams. I've always wanted to do it. At some point, I will do it, but it's something that I've always wanted to do. I've always thought about it. I've thought at one point in my life, because that's the other. I'm one of those people who's like, oh, I should do this. I love the idea of like doing a million things, reinventing myself. And at a certain point, I wanted to go to film school. And it was all stuff that I was doing to not accept that I wanted to only be a writer all my life. It was like, oh, I'll go to law school, I'll go to film school, I'll do this. But screenwriting is something that's always intrigued me. So I'm very much rooting for this project, and I can't wait to hear all about it. Now I'm like racking my brain because I'm like, what does she want to tell me without telling me? Um, so something I think that probably happens to you with your clients, I don't know if it happens to you personally, I imagine it does, but let's talk a little bit about writer's block.
Hmm.
How do you help? How do you does it happen to you, and how do you help yourself get through it, and how do you help others get through? I know people say like, oh, it doesn't exist. It kind of does. um, what's your best advice both to yourself and to your clients?
Yeah, I fall into that category now of that. I think writer's block is a myth. I
Yeah.
do, because I feel like when you have that internal practice, whatever that is for you, of being able to kind of clear out the dross of your mind and allow inspiration to come into you, you're not looking for it. You're setting the stage for it. That there is so much, and quantum physics bears this out. If you want to go down that rabbit hole, there's so much information out there all the time. There's so much inspiration available. It's just a matter of how and when and why we tap into it. And again, that's why I say there's nothing new under the sun, because it's all out there. It's just a question of how we refine ourselves enough to kind of grasp onto the nuances of one subject or thought or another, and bring it down. So I don't feel like there's a lack of anything. As a matter of fact, in today's world, we're in greater danger of having what I call infobesity, which is way more information than we need. We're just deluged with information from every turn on every device. And that gets us caught up in, the thinking mind. Whereas what we're really interested in is the intuitive, creative mind, which, as the Buddhists say, having no mind, where you're empty enough to receive. And and again, it goes back to, as part answer to your question, to me, it does go back to writer's block equating to some sort of fear. It is something stopping you from doing it. And it's usually not on a, practical level. It's more on a psycho-spiritual or emotional level. So again, that's what I delve into. It's not like I put them on the couch and, you know, get out my tablet and make it that formal, but I let the conversation lead itself down whatever pathway it leads itself. And usually, and the other thing that's really cool and I'm really grateful for and really humbled by is, for some reason, well, I shouldn't say for some reason, people trust me. Like they know that they can talk to me. They can tell me their deepest fears. They can tell me what is bothering them or what they're concerned about. And and they trust me to hold that space for them. And so that's a whole other subject, because I don't think that all editors are created equal. There's a ton of great editors out there, but there's some editors, I'll just say that some clients have come to me after being sort of wounded by what other editors have said to them. And I can discern by what they tell me that that person really didn't tap into the essence of the person. They were trying to overlay their vision of what that writer should be talking about or the way that they should be writing it. And again, not that that's anything bad. It's just maybe they had limited experience with the editing process. So for me, editing is the thing that happens after that entire upfront piece takes place. And that's what I really focus on. As a matter of fact, I've just recently formalized it on my website. And I call it Write, WRITE, Rite of Passage, because that's what it feels like to me. I'm taking, putting a client in a dinghy boat or yacht and sailing them out to the sea, and I'm guiding them, towards the horizon, towards their North Star, towards their sun, and staying with them until they get there. So I don't know. I kind of got off on a tangent there. I don't know if
No,
that
no,
answers your question.
I know, absolutely. And I have to say, it's, I like this idea of rite of passage. And I think, it all goes back, we're getting back to sort of the same theme of fear and, that we're our own worst enemies, et cetera. But, when you put a book out into the world, it's your baby,
Right.
and rejection really stings. You get used to it, of course, but in other words, it's your baby and you believe in it. So to have somebody who's guiding you, who has that kind of humanity and who has that kind of sensitivity, I would say, is really nice. It's like very comforting, to have somebody say, listen, have you thought about this or have you thought about that? But somebody who's actually like there with you. Now, I love what the metaphor, and I love the words that you use, because it is hard to write a book and it is hard to put yourself out there. And it is hard to have somebody be mean to you, and especially when it's something that you've produced and who knows how long it's taken and who knows, how much just emotionally you've put into this and, time wise and whatever, I know a lot of people write books, but it's a big deal. It is a big deal.
It is a big deal. It should be, because your name is on it. It's there
That's right.
forever. It's part of your legacy. And you use the term, midwife is another term that a lot of people use when they describe me. They even call me their book mama, like
Yeah.
they give me a euphemism around being a parental in some way or a
Yeah.
midwife in some way. And I totally understand that. And to your point too about the disappointment, the other thing that I help my authors do up front at the very beginning, again, because I'm left brain, right brain. I'm not just the creative side, but I'm the marketing, practical business side. So I get them thinking about, how do you see yourself raising this book once it's born? Because no one would have a baby and say, oh, good luck. You raise the baby, right? So I get them thinking about all the things that they feel either comfortable or challenged by as a working author. So,
Yeah.
some have fear of public speaking, some, uh, there's all kinds of stuff that comes up around that. And it's really fascinating. Again, my psychology personality is very fascinated by what happens right before book launch for a lot of clients where they feel like they're ready to jump off a cliff, or they're just feeling really sensitive and emotional, and in some cases even panicked.
Oh, for
um,
sure. For sure.
so so if you have a strategy for what happens after the book launches and how it finds its legs, as they say, and finds its way into the world, then you're less likely to suffer from postpartum depression, because you're birthing this book and like nobody gives a damn, you know what
Right.
I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a good thing to think about. It's nice that you have this duality, because it's really helpful for somebody to be guided, sort of more spiritually, artistically, creatively, but also to have somebody who's saying like, hey, by the way, how do you feel about social media? Have you thought about starting a podcast? I mean, authors have to deal with so much self promotion. I mean, that's, no, very rarely is the publisher going to do anything for you unless you're like a huge name. And even if you are, so
Right.
it's nice to have somebody who's like, hey, by the way, these are things you should be thinking about, and maybe you should start, practicing your public speaking because you're going to have to do a book tour or whatever. So thank you for bringing that up, because I think we often, I mean, somebody like me who's kind of like I'm a dreamer. I'm kind of like la di da, I wrote my book, I'm an artist, whatever. But I'm very practical as well. And so it's something I always I'm like, okay, I can do that. Let's just get the book published and then I can do that. So we're almost at the end of the podcast. I do want to ask what you hope people who read your work, and I would also say people who work with you, what do you hope that they carry with them afterwards?
Hmm.
Your legacy, Gina. Let's talk about your legacy.
Well, I think that, again, it goes back to creative expression, creativity, consciousness. Like that is the core of life for me. And if people could take away, if they could disavow themselves of this notion that they don't have a story.
Yeah.
I mean, by your very existence, you have a story, and what you have to say matters. It matters to someone, even if it's your own family, your children and your grandchildren, your coworkers, whatever. Um, so it matters, and you have a right to say it.
Yeah.
Everybody has a right to speak their truth through the lens of their own lived experience. That's what a memoir is. It's not, you know, the truth from every angle. It's your truth.
Mhm.
And yeah. So having said that, I think it's also important to um, to be kind. You know, writers. I mean, I'm saying this based on what's happening in today's world as well. That there's a lot of discourse out there that is not very pleasant, and if we took, for example, the doctor's oath, first do no harm. When you're writing, doesn't mean that you can't write about things that traumatized you or things that people said or did. But beyond that, it's really about, it's just telling the truth. It's, as Hemingway said, write hard about what hurts, right? That's great to do, but at the same time, the editing process, go back and look and say to yourself, is this authentically true, and am I being kind um, in my articulation of it? I think the world needs more kindness in
It all the
what's being
time.
written these days. So yeah.
I think that's a great legacy. I mean, that's a great thing to also to leave to leave us with. Normally, I would say what's next for you, but you've already kind of hinted at it and told me that you can't talk about it.
Yeah.
So you're gonna so
Hopefully soon.
well,
Yes.
you'll come back. Well, you'll come back on the podcast and, you'll tell me what you're going to be wearing to the Oscars and, and all that good stuff. And you'll invite me to the premiere and, and then we can announce
Absolutely.
to the world. But I'm so grateful that we had this conversation. I meet a lot of writers. I think I told you, like, ever since I got it in my head that I really needed to start producing something. And for years I couldn't. And we could talk about that for a long time about why I was blocked. But I sort of like forced myself to spend time with more writers, to speak with more writers. And I really believe that proximity is magical. Something magical happens because writers are mostly, like very generous people, very loving. They understand. And so talking to you, I always feel better. I just feel
Oh,
better. And I know that a lot of our fellow writers will be listening to this podcast, and I think it will give them that kindness that you have and that understanding that enables you to guide so many people to then being able to deliver their babies out into the world. And so we'll bring it back to the baby metaphor. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I love talking to you.
I love talking to you too. And I feel it's the same as with Joe, that I feel like I've known you for a long, long time. And
Right.
maybe we should do a writer's retreat in Italy sometime. Maybe that
Hey,
would be
I
future.
want to. No, 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 no. Let's talk about it. Okay, so you heard it here first. So that's what Gina's doing next. She's doing a writer's retreat in Italy. I've been talking about this. No, yes, absolutely. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast. And everyone stay tuned for the writer's retreat coming soon to Italy with Gina Mazza and who knows who else. Thank you.
Thank you.